Hey everyone, you're here sewing with Cody and Pete, and in today's video we are working on the Bernina L860 overlocker. And we've already gone over in a previous video going over the basics and the overview of the serger. So now we're actually going to start playing with some of the stitches and just getting you familiar with changing stitches and just kind of like threading the machine to do some of these different stitches. So before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe the video and subscribe to the channel, and also check out our merchant shop, which the link can be found in the description in the video, and you'll find cute little things like this mug and our little logo on the other side, along with t-shirts, cell phone cases, notebooks, pens, all kind of fun stuff. And the proceeds from the sales of those items help support the channel. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are with this absolutely gorgeous Bernina L860. So we've gone in the overview already that the L860 is between the L850 and the L890. The L890 can do cover and chain stitches, so it does have a cover stitch looper, and the L850 can just do your typical overlock stitches, which is what this one is fully capable of doing. But this one takes it a step further and gives you the automatic tension like we have on the L890, but that you can still tweak. It gives you the interactive touchscreen, which gives you video tutorials for every single step, along with automatically changing stitch length, differential feed depending on what fabric you're working with. It does that automatically when you tell the machine what fabric and what stitch you're going to be working with. And that's something that we're going to be doing today. So right now the machine, as you can see, is set to a 4-thread overlock. Well, that's your most basic stitch. So let's change it up a little bit. So one of the most popular stitches, aside from that 4-thread overlock, which is typically used for a lot of your garment sewing, is one of the most popular stitches is a rolled hem. So we are going to change to a rolled hem. So it's super easy. All we need to do is come up here to select the stitch, and so what it's doing is it's asking if I want to save this stitch if I've made any changes. In this case I don't want to, so you just hit the X, and then you can scroll through and find the stitch you're looking for. So here you can see all the different stitches that this machine's capable of doing. However, it just gives you a visual. It doesn't necessarily give you a name. But if you want a name, so if you know you want a 3-thread rolled hem, let's actually come and click this icon up here, and this will actually give you the name of each stitch. This is how I prefer to scroll through my stitches, because then I know exactly what I'm looking at. Because sometimes the pictures can be a little deceiving, especially if you're not extremely familiar with what stitch you're looking for. So we are going for a 3-thread rolled hem, and so on this machine it is stitch number 8. So we click on that stitch, and as we went over in the overview video, it will go through step by step by step, so it knows exactly what stitch you've come from, and it will guide you into basically disassembling the machine from that stitch to our new stitch. So the first thing it's telling us to do is to raise our presser foot, which it already is. Go to the next step. So now it's telling us to unthread the following thread paths. Because it knew we had a 4-thread overlock, so we're using both needles, it's telling us to unthread the left needle. So let's raise our needle up, so we can open our door and gain access to this guy. This is the screwdriver that we use to release the screw. So I'll give you a closer up video of how to do this, but one thing I want you to take note of is the little screws, which are right above the needle. They're very short. So when you do unscrew it, you just barely have to turn that screw, just enough to back it off of the needle to release the needle. And then we do recommend that you screw it in a little bit. Don't screw it in too far, but just screw it in a little bit more than what you've unscrewed it. Because the screws are so tiny, we have had a number of customers lose those screws. So you just want to barely back out that screw, remove the needle, and screw that screw back in. So let's pull some of this thread through, since we have a chain here. So it'll make it easier to unthread the threads or unthread the needle. So let's take a closer look in this area so you can see what I'm doing exactly. All right, so we're up close and personal with the needle. So you'll see here there are two screws. There's one at the top left and there's one at the bottom right, just barely to the left and to the right of each other. So the one at the very top represents our left needle. The one at the bottom represents our right needle. So what we'll do is we'll just loosen up that left needle, and we can easily remove this loosen up the left screw. We can easily remove this left needle. If you do have difficulty grabbing the needles and pulling them out, there is a little needle inserter, which is what this guy is. So this end is designed to hold the needle. So if you don't want to drop it, you can insert it just like this, and to help hold that needle. So that'll help take it out and put it in. But it can definitely be done just with your fingers. So here we remove the left needle. We'll insert it into the side of the machine here in our little storage. And then we'll go back and make sure we tighten up that screw just a little bit so it doesn't fall out. You don't want to tighten it so it's tight, because then it's pushing against the other side of that little shaft, and we don't want that. So one thing I also want you to take note of are these little windows right here. These little windows are for us to look in and to make sure that our needle, the top of our needle, is actually hitting that little bar inside that window. So we know that our needle is inserted all of the way. The simple little things like that that make stuff like this so much easier. So what we'll do is we'll cut this thread from the very top of the machine where it goes into the machine, so we don't have any of that thread interfering with our machine while we're sewing. All right, so that's the first thing. We want to unthread that left needle. Something else I want you to notice is, and we saw this in the introductory video, is every single step there is a video. So if you have any question about what they're talking about, you can always hit the little camcorder, and then it's going to give you a video of exactly what to do. So it tells you to cut the thread, we're going to pull the needle out, and so on and so forth. There's a video for every single step, and that's what makes this machine so easy to use. So let's go to the next step. So this is telling us to attach presser foot L10, which is the presser foot that's already on there. And so I know the question is going to be where is that labeled? So if you look at the foot, we'll see right at the top, has that L10. So all of the feet for the L850 and the L860 are all going to be L feet. If you have the L890, they are going to be C feet. So we've already got the foot attached. Now we're going to adjust the pressure foot pressure to 4, and again that's this little dial up here, and there's different numbers in a little section to tell you exactly what number you're on. 4 is the standard pressure foot pressure unless you are working with a different type of fabric. So now we're going to make sure we have the right needle in, which we do. We want to make sure we have the knife activated, which we do. So the knife, as we saw in other videos, is a mechanism right here. So when it's pulled towards you, it's going to be activated. If we push it away from you, and you'll see your knife right here, you'll see it drop. So now it's deactivated. But here we are working with the knife. And adjust the cutting width. So the cutting width is right here. So standard cutting width is at a 6, but it's telling us to drop it down to a 5.5. So now we want the hook out upper looper converter. So we basically just want this upper looper converter, which we've talked about before. That's this little mechanism here. We want to make sure that that's disengaged. And typically it is, unless you're coming from a 2-thread overlock or 2-thread overlock. The next thing is make sure the rolled hem selection lever is positioned to the R. That's this little guy right here. And if we look, there's an O and an R. We want to move this back towards U, and that would be on the R, which is for your rolled hem. And the last step, we want to make sure our right needle is inserted and threaded. Our upper looper is activated and threaded, and our lower looper is activated and threaded. But what I'm going to do, just to go over it again, if your machine was not threaded or if you want to change threads, let's actually do one of my favorite things, and that is threading the machine. This machine is so easy to thread. I swear it's almost easier to thread it than it is to tie off to change a new color, just to rethread the whole machine. And remember, as we mentioned before, it doesn't matter which order you thread the machine in. So, but remember, when you are threading it, hold it with both hands and make sure you push down in the back to make sure it gets locked into place. We'll bring it down. Bring it down, and I like to pull some slack so you can see it here, hopefully. And I'll bring my finger close to the edge and make sure we have our loopers this turn to the left. You can always press on the foot pedal and it will lock them in place. Like again, it doesn't really matter what order you do all this in pretty much. But you have to have all this engaged before you press on the foot pedal and you hear the motor. You'll hear that that little compressor running. So we take the tip of our thread, we just hover it right above the hole of the red, which is our lower looper, and press on your foot pedal, and it will just suck it in. So there it is, it shot it out here. So here we'll go to the blue thread, which is our upper looper, and make sure you pull enough slack out. And something else I've found that can help too is if you ever do have any issues trying to get it threaded, make sure you have a nice clean cut, and make sure your tubes for your loopers are actually locked into place. And to do that, to make sure that they are locked into place, you can always come over to the right side of the machine, turn the hand wheel, kind of like rock it back and forth a little bit, and if the tubes weren't locked into place exactly, you'll hear them snap in. So here we've got our blue thread, which is our upper looper. We've got our slack, and we'll push on our foot pedal, and the thread will suck it right on through. And here we have it shot out of here with our out of our upper looper. So then we'll go to our right needle, snap it in here, come here, and we'll just follow the path for the green, which is our right needle. This guide, come here, and then we'll use our needle threader, making sure it's on the green, and we have a video on using the needle threader. It's very easy. Just making sure that the needle threader is set for the color needle, or the color needle that you're working with, because there is a green and a yellow, and so there's a green and a yellow portion of the needle threader, and the color is indicated right here. Very easy, very straightforward. So once we have it all threaded, we can turn this back, and you'll see the tubes dislodge from the loopers. We can click the check mark, and everything is set to what we need. We can close our doors, and now, in this case, we can attach our sliding table back on. So one thing to remember is, because I've seen a lot of customers do this, is when you are working with a rolled hem, to get a pretty rolled hem, you only can use one layer of fabric. Because if you use 2 layers of fabric, it's too much fabric, and that fabric can't roll underneath into itself. So using 1 layer is what this particular stitch is designed for. And there is another trick to getting a absolutely beautiful rolled hem, and that is using like a woolly nylon or a maxi lock stretch in the upper looper, which would be your blue looper. The maxi lock stretch and woolly nylon are fluffy threads. They're fluffy threads when they're relaxed, but when there's tension against it, they look very similar to just regular thread. They're very tight and very sleek. And I don't have any issues feeding the maxi lock stretch, which is what we use the most, into those air threading loopers I don't have a problem at all. You just have to make sure you're dealing with a nice clean cut at the end of that thread. But that does give you a absolutely beautiful rolled hem. And you only, like I mentioned before, you only need that maxi lock stretch in the upper looper. So you want that thread to match your other thread. So if you were doing, like in this case, we're going to be doing a gray rolled hem. So your right needle and your lower looper would need to be just regular gray like Serger, but then your upper looper would need to be the gray maxi lock stretch. So you really only need one maxi lock stretch for every group of colors you're working with. So now let's see how well we did with threading, which shouldn't be an issue. But sometimes I've always found with any machine, especially dealing with a rolled hem, because it does have to roll that fabric underneath, every weight of fabric and even different textures of fabric. Some fabrics that are heavily screen printed, some fabrics that are just dyed, they all roll differently. So I find that I do have to adjust, depending on my fabric, my tension of my lower looper, because that's what's really pulling that thread underneath. And one thing that I've discovered with teaching the classes on these machines is the default setting for the 3-thread rolled hem, the lower looper tension is only 5.5. And if any of y'all are familiar with some of our previous model Sergers, that lower looper tension is usually like around a 7. So I will look at it and see what the 5.5 looks like, but in my experience, we do need to typically increase that tension. And so the beauty of that on this machine is once you find the right tension that works best for you, you can save it. And that can be your new default rolled hem stitch. So we can go and do that. So we'll look and see what we've got. So here is our rolled hem. It's actually a very, very pretty. I don't see us needing to change anything. It looks perfect. The only thing that you could change is using the maxi lock stretch. And what the maxi lock stretch is going to do is going to fill in those gaps. So if you look closely enough, you can still kind of see that green fabric between each stitching. The maxi lock stretch would fill all that in, and all you would see was beautiful, beautiful thread. So that is our rolled hem. And we didn't have to change our tension at all. But this is a very soft fabric. It's just 100% cotton. But this particular printing, we didn't have to change anything. But I have seen many times before with the 890 and 860 that we did have to increase that lower looper tension. So that is something you may have to do when you're stitching, depending on your fabric. But that's exactly what we're looking for with a rolled hem. It's absolutely perfect. And the machines are so smooth in stitching it. So the rolled hem is used for many different things. Some of the most common things are just like napkins, handkerchiefs, but also it's an excellent stitch for the bottom of a ruffle. So if you were going to make a lot of ruffles and you didn't want to have to actually fold the fabric underneath and sew it by a sewing machine, you can easily do a rolled hem in matching thread to your fabric. You're hardly going to see it because you can see how narrow this stitch is, but it would secure those stitches beautifully because it's actually rolling that fabric and tucking it underneath. It's a perfect stitch. So there's many different uses and applications for a rolled hem. So the next stitch we're going to work with is going to be a flat felt seam. This one is really cool, and there's a number of different things you can do with this flat seam or flat felt seam. So let's go ahead, tell the machine that we want to change to this particular stitch. So let's go to our stitches. We don't want to save anything. So let's go and find our flat felt seam. I'm not sure, there it is. So there's a couple different ones. So this is something that you will encounter while you're scrolling through your stitches or your stitch options, is you may find what appear to be the same stitch. So for instance, stitch 5, which is a 3-thread flat lock wide, and then stitch number 6, which is a 3-thread flat lock narrow. They're the same stitch, but you're just changing the needles. So here, for the narrow, we're using the right needle. For the wide, we're using the left needle. So unlike a traditional sewing machine, sergers, we can't move our needle positions to change the width of our stitch. But the way we're able to adjust our stitch width is by changing which needle we're using. And so the question has come up many times before is, if I'm not using a needle, if I unthread it, do I have to still remove the needle? The answer is yes. You definitely want to make sure you remove that needle when you're not using it, especially if you're not using the left needle. So if you just unthread that left needle and leave it in place, what's going to happen is that as that upper looper comes over, that left needle is still going to catch that looper. But when the looper moves over and the needle comes out, there's no thread holding that side of the looper or that side of the stitch in place, and you're going to end up with little loops on the left-hand side of your project or of your stitch. So yes, you definitely want to remove that needle, especially if it's a left needle. And as for not using the right needle, when we're just using the left needle, I would still remove that needle, even though it really shouldn't interfere with our stitching too much. It's still, we're adding, especially depending on what fabric we're working with, we're adding extra needle penetrations when we don't need it, and it just needs to come out. And also, you're causing wear and tear to that needle, where otherwise it could be stored over here and not being used and not being worn down. So it just saves the life of your needle a little bit longer. So yeah, so definitely remove those needles when you're not using them. So let's do the wide flat lock seam. So the flat lock seam, I think I was calling it a flat felt seam, but it's a flat lock seam. So let's go and tell the machine what we need to do, or let the machine tell us what we need to do. So the first thing is to raise the foot up. And we're going to unthread the right needle. But you know, I'm a fan of unthreading the entire machine. So let's just go ahead and unthread the entire machine. And this is definitely excellent practice if you're new to the machine, because it gives you practice in threading. So we're going to unthread the right needle. We're going to put on the L10 foot, which is already on there, pressure at 4, which is already set to, because we haven't changed anything. And what we're going to do is we're going to be using the left needle. So the right needle's in there. So let's go and take out the right needle. And let's just move it over to the left needle position. And make sure we look at our little viewing window, make sure the tip of the needle, the top of the needle, is hitting where it's supposed to in that little viewing window. So we're good to go. So make sure we activate the knife, which it already is. Make sure our cutting width is at 6. So we did change it previously to 5.5. But let's change it to 6, which is your default. So we're now at 6. Make sure the hook upper looper converter is disengaged, which it is. We want to make sure your rolled hem selection lever is set to O for overlock. At least that's what I'm assuming the O is for. And it was set on R for rolled hem, so we just move that guy up. Our micro thread control, make sure it's set to 0. That's something that you may or may not have to change later on. So now we want to make sure we thread our left needle, upper looper, and lower looper. So we'll go and quickly do that. So before we actually do it, we need to engage our air threading chambers, which they are. They shot right over. Have our slack in our thread, push down your foot pedal, and let the thread be taken up by the air threading mechanism. Perfect. Super simple. So make sure we lock it in back here. Grab our thread, pull some slack. That shoots it right on out. And then we just need our left needle, which is this one right here, the yellow. And so we just follow the yellow thread path. Use our left guides. Make sure our needle threader is switched to the yellow. Wrap it around there, feed it through the needle threader. Super, super easy. And that's it. So remember, if we try and close this door before we disengage the air threading loopers, it won't let us close the door. Super simple, but it makes all the difference in the world. So disengage that, then the door will shut. Hit the check mark. So now our stitch, our tensions, everything has been changed. So now it's showing a 3-thread flat lock wide. Our stitch length is 2.5. Our differential feet is always going to be at 1 unless we told it what fabric we're working with. Left needle's at 2, upper looper is at 4, lower looper is at 7. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have our fabric. We'll do it right sides together. And we're just going to stitch along the edge. So one thing that is always very, very important when working with the serger, especially if you're new to sergers, is you always want to remember that you need to always cut a little, at least a little bit of thread, a little bit of fabric off the edge of your fabric. Does that make sense? You always need to cut a little bit of fabric off the edge of your project. There we are. Because the purpose of the cutter is to give you the right width to accommodate that stitch, but also to give you a nice clean edge. Because if I were to start and try and stitch this, first of all, it's a little crooked. Second of all, I've got all these threads sticking out, so my stitch isn't going to be very pretty. But by having the cutter engaged and having a cutter on a serger, it will give you a nice clean edge. So here we have our stitch. Unfortunately, this is my fault. You can hardly see it. But if you can see it, yeah, you can kind of see it. This is what it looks like on the front. This is what it looks like on the back. This is not what we're going for at all, by the way. So there's 2 different ways you can use your flat lock seam. So the way it's used is depending if you do right sides together, wrong sides together, because there's 2 different sides of the stitch that you can use. So what you're actually going to do, it's not so much as a securing stitch as it is more decorative, and it has purpose. But what we'll do is we'll pull these apart, and then you'll end up with this. And so the other side is your flat part. And again, it's very hard to see. I'll stitch it again using the other side of the fabric. But this is one side, this is the other side. So we did a quick little project making little drawstring bags, and we used this same stitch to stitch around the top. So we had something like this, and we're able to use this as a casing. So we put like yarn through it, and we're able to have a small little a drawstring bag. But so one thing about this flat lock seam, in order to get it nice and flat, if you look here, I'm not sure if you can tell, but if you look here, this fabric's actually rolled underneath. It's actually rolled backwards. So this came over and then rolled back. That's not what we want. If you want that stitch to be extremely flat, you want to have to work this fabric a little bit, and each fabric's going to be a little bit different. But I like to use my little screwdriver that came to remove the needles. And stick it in here, and what we're doing is we're actually flattening out that seam. So now you can see it's completely flat, because now this fabric is flat going this way and this one's flat going that way. So you kind of do have to work out these stitches, and all we're doing is just poking it in here and kind of just pulling that fabric flat. There are many little tools you can use to do this. But you can see here how flat that stitch is. All the difference in the world. You can see this is how it's still rolled. This is what it looks like nice and flat. It makes beautiful, beautiful stitches when you're using different threads or variegated threads. So let me stitch it the other way so you can really see what the other side of the stitch looks like. Okay, so here we've got fabric. Now we have it wrong sides together. And we'll do the same exact stitch. So here we are with the stitch. So you can see a little bit better now. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pull this and just watch. It almost just like lays nice and flat when you give it a little pull. And sometimes it just lays perfectly flat right out the gate. But then again, on our back, which was on our front, the other one, we can get this fabric to lay a little bit flatter, and it would look nice. It would look nice and pretty. But that's the other side of the stitch, and this is really your flat lock stitch, and this is what a lot of people are going for. But absolutely beautiful. It's such a neat stitch and so easy to create. And a lot of it is the loose tension of our left needle that allows that fabric to pull and to lay flat. But we didn't have to change any tension. The machine did all that for us. That's why I can't explain enough how wonderful this machine is, along with the L890, because it does all the work for you. You don't have to think about it. It's hard to do something wrong. All right, so let's do one more stitch. This time we're going to do a 2-thread stitch. So in the introductory video, we did a 4-thread with your 4-thread overlock, which is your most securing stitch. It's excellent for sewing garments together. We did the rolled hem. Then we did the flat lock. Now let's do one that just requires 2 threads. So this, when you're doing any type of 2-thread stitch, it's definitely more decorative than securing for sure, because it's just not strong enough to actually hold anything together. It's not a bad stitch to use after you've already sewn something together and you just kind of want to quickly, easily finish off that edge. So the threads, the fabric just doesn't come unraveled. That'd be perfect use for a 2-thread. So let's go and see what we've got for 2-thread stitches. So we'll scroll through. So here's a 2-thread wrapped overlock wide, which is what we could use because we have the left needle in. But let's actually go to a 2-thread wrapped overlock narrow. So we're just using the right needle, because the wide stitch is fairly wide, but the narrow stitch is all we really need to secure those that raw edge. And one thing to remember, especially now that we're working with a 2-thread, is a wide 2-thread could actually cause the fabric to pucker if you're working with more delicate, lightweight fabric. So let's just do a 2-thread. So we'll follow the instructions. So it says a 2-thread wrapped overlock narrow. So we're going to unthread the left needle and unthread the upper looper. But like I've said before, it's just so much easier just to unthread everything and start over. So we'll unthread our loopers. So here we're going to take out our left needle, and we're just going to pop it right back over to the right side. Because it's one of those things, since we've unthreaded everything, this is always like our first thing to do, even though it doesn't tell you to the closer to the end to move our needle over. I kind of jumped the gun and just moved it over just because out of habit. So we've got our left needle now in our right needle position. Let's move it over. So our L10 foot, because remember this L10 foot that came with the machine is a foot you'll pretty much use for everything. There are a few other feet that you can add to the machine. Some of them are clear, just so you can see things a little better. Some of them are excellent for piping and putting in zippers, which will be another video. Different cording we can do and like a ruffler for this machine. But most of everything that you're going to be doing, you'll be using the L10 foot, unless it's a specialty technique. And make sure our pressure is at 4, and that's always going to be at 4 unless we've told a different fabric. So here we are, the right needle. Put our needle in the right needle position, which we did. Activate the knife. It's activated. Adjust cutting width to 6. It's already set to 6. Now here, we're going to need a hook in the upper looper converter. So now it's telling us to engage it. So I'll zoom in so you can see what we need to do here. So here is our upper looper converter. So all we have to do is move it over, and you want to snap in to place. And that is it. That's all you have to do. Super, super simple. So we'll go up to the next page. So make sure you move your roll hem selection lever to the O, which it is. Micro thread control at 0. Now we're going to thread the right needle and the lower looper. So let's do the lower looper first. So we engage our loopers, and so our lower looper is the red. So we'll come here, get our slack, let's feed it on in there. You see it shoot right out. So one thing is you don't want this thread to be too terribly long. You want it to be about 3 to 4 inches, I would say. But this is right now, it's like 10 inches, which is just too much. And then our right needle, which is our green. And that's it. Hit the check mark. And look what it tells you. I still have this engaged, but I told it I was done. And it's telling me that I haven't disengaged this. So as soon as I disengage it, that message goes away. The machine's incredibly smart. It won't let you do something that you shouldn't do. All right, so let's give it a try. Let's see what she looks like. So here is our 2-thread wrapped overlocker narrow. So what's different about this opposed to a 3-thread narrow stitch is, so this one we have our needle in our usual position. But what's happening is our looper is coming from the bottom, wrapping it to the top and going back and forth. So if you look, you can see that upper looper, in a sense, is also our lower looper. There's not a separate lower loop or an upper loop, it's just wrapped around. So in that case, it's not a very secure stitch. So see if we flip it over and give it a little pull, see how it's loose? That's just the case with a 2-thread. It's just not quite as tight, but it's tighter than what you may think. This is definitely more decorative and then just designed to kind of hold our fabric in place and keeping it from fraying. But a super easy stitch, and it uses less thread. We only need 2 different cones, or 2 cones, opposed to 3 or 4. But that is the 2-thread overlock. And so that's when you would use this nifty little upper looper converter that's built into the machine. We just engage it, and that's all we have to do. And what it does, it bypasses this upper looper. So it uses the lower looper and the upper looper as one, in a sense, without the upper looper having to be threaded. All right, well, that's it for some of the most used stitches on the Bernina L860 and how to thread the machine to do it. The machine does most of the work. That's the beauty of this machine. And the L890, of course. The L890 just has the cover stitch and the chain stitches that you can do that this one just isn't capable of doing, which is fine because a lot of people don't use those stitches, but they want the features of the automation, and that's what the L860 does. All right, so remember, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you see more content and when it's uploaded, and of course, don't forget to check out the merchant shop and see all the fun stuff that we've got up there for y'all. All right, and remember, as always, happy sewing.